The Syringe. The Dare follows a group of people who have been kidnapped by a masked man named Dominic. Trapped in captivity, they quickly discover that escaping won't be their only concern. The criminals' true objective is to force the victims to torture one another, turning every choice into a new nightmare. One of the film's most agonizing scenes involves Kat. Dominic hands Jay a syringe and forces him to inject a substance directly into her ear. The camera never reveals exactly what's inside the syringe, making the scene even more suspenseful. All we see is Kat's desperation as the procedure takes place, along with the horrified expression on Jay's face, knowing he has no choice if he wants to stay alive. The revelation of what was actually inside the syringe doesn't come until later, in one of the Dare's most memorable scenes. We discover that the syringe didn't contain poison or some deadly disease. It contained spider eggs. They hatch inside Kat's body, and shortly afterward, dozens of tiny spiders begin crawling out of her mouth, spreading across her face as she falls into complete despair. Human Farm. The farm starts with a simple but extremely disturbing premise. Nora and her boyfriend Alec are traveling through the countryside when they decide to stop and get some rest. After they fall asleep, the two wake up on an isolated farm where human beings have taken the place of livestock. They're captured, locked in cages, and treated as nothing more than merchandise. As soon as they arrive, Nora is separated from Alec and discovers that men and women are given very different fates. While the men are kept alive only until it's time for slaughter, the women are used for breeding. Nora completely loses her freedom and begins to exist solely to serve the interests of the people running the farm. The cruelest part is that her suffering doesn't end there. She's forced to bear children, but the babies are taken away immediately after they're born, making her torment even worse. Throughout the story, Nora tries to escape with her boyfriend, but she doesn't get very far. In the ending, she gets onto a bus, and for a moment, it seems like she's finally about to escape that nightmare. But only moments later, she discovers that the cannibals are already on board. In the end, she's served at a banquet for the monsters who run the farm. What makes this ending so devastating is that Nora doesn't lose only her life. She loses all of her humanity long before that. She's reduced to nothing more than a product, stripped of every choice, and exploited until her very last moment. Living statue. In House of Wax, Wade is part of a group of friends who end up trapped in an abandoned town, completely unaware that its residents are hiding a gruesome secret. While many of the characters suffer quick deaths, Wade's fate is far worse. After being captured, Wade is injected with a substance that completely paralyzes his body. The cruelest detail is that he remains fully conscious. He can see, hear, and feel everything, but he can't move a single muscle or call for help. The killers then cover his body with hot wax, turning him into one of the famous statues inside the House of Wax. Instead of dying immediately, he remains trapped beneath that hardened layer, fully aware of his own suffering. The situation becomes even more desperate when his friend Dalton finds the statue and realizes that Wade is still alive. When Dalton tries to peel the wax away from Wade's face, he accidentally tears off part of his skin as well, revealing that the wax has completely fused to his body. Wade feels every second of it, but remains unable to react. That's what makes his fate so horrifying. He doesn't just lose his life, he also loses every bit of his autonomy, transformed into nothing more than a decorative object. 3 seconds. The Endless follows brothers Aaron and Justin, who, years after escaping a mysterious cult, decide to return to the place where they spent part of their childhood. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than an isolated community hidden deep in the woods, but they soon discover that a supernatural force controls the entire area. During their investigation, Justin encounters people trapped in different time loops. Some relive the same day over and over. Others remain trapped for much longer periods, but Aaron discovers a fate far crueler than any of the others. As he approaches a small tent, he hears music playing on a loop and a scream that is cut off every few seconds. Inside, there's a man sitting in a chair. As soon as the cycle restarts, the man jumps to his feet and desperately tries to escape, but 3 seconds later, an invisible force instantly kills him. Moments afterward, he reappears in the exact same chair to repeat everything all over again. The most terrifying detail is that this man knows exactly what's happening. He's fully aware that he's trapped inside that cycle, and he tries to escape every single time, even though he knows he'll never succeed. There is no rest, no hope, and no possibility of breaking the loop. That's exactly what makes this one of the most hopeless fates in horror. Death stops being an ending and becomes an eternal routine. The Sin of Gluttony. Seven presents a series of murders inspired by the 7 deadly sins. In the story, detectives William Somerset and David Mills try to track down a serial killer who turns each murder into a form of symbolic punishment. And in the very first case, the film delivers one of its most unforgettable deaths. When they enter a dark, filthy apartment, the investigators find the body of an obese man sitting at a dining table. At first glance, it looks as though he simply died during a meal, but the autopsy reveals something far more disturbing. The killer tied the victim to the chair and forced him to eat continuously for hours until his body could no longer take blanket and his stomach burst. The official cause of death is internal hemorrhaging, triggered after the killer delivered a violent kick to his already overloaded body. What makes this scene so memorable isn't just the victim's fate, it's the entire environment. The apartment is covered in filth, insects, and rotting food, reinforcing the idea of total degradation. The real mother. In Barbarian, everything begins when Tess arrives in Detroit for a job interview and discovers that the house she rented is already occupied by another guest, Keith. After a series of strange events, the two discover a secret passage in the basement that leads to a massive labyrinth of tunnels hidden beneath the house. It's in that place that the creature known only as Mother lives. At first, she seems like just another monster, but the film reveals that her story is far more tragic than it first appears. Decades earlier, the house's former owner, Frank, kidnapped women and kept them imprisoned beneath the house. Over the years, entire generations were born in captivity as a result of abuse and incest. Mother is a direct descendant of that cycle of violence and has spent her entire life without ever knowing the outside world. That's exactly what makes her fate so disturbing. She never had a normal childhood, she never experienced genuine affection, and she never learned what a real family was supposed to be. Her only understanding of motherhood came from an old VHS tape about caring for babies, which she watched over and over again in the tunnels. Because of that, Mother truly believes she's helping when she captures people and tries to treat them as her children. In her mind, feeding them, protecting them, and keeping them close is an act of love, even if her actions are absolutely horrifying. Eternal hunger. Dread follows a group of college students who decide to make a documentary about people's greatest fears, but one of the members of the project, Quaid, takes the idea far beyond its limits and begins turning the participants' traumas into real-life experiments. And no one suffers more than Cheryl. During the interviews, Cheryl reveals that she was abused by her own father throughout her childhood. Because he worked in a slaughterhouse, he always came home smelling of meat and blood. That trauma caused her to develop a complete aversion to any kind of meat, leading her to become a vegetarian. Quaid discovers that secret and decides to exploit that very fear. He kidnaps Cheryl and locks her alone inside a basement. For days, the only food available is a single piece of meat. With only a limited amount of water, no help, and completely isolated, she tries to endure for as long as she possibly can. But eventually, hunger wins. Desperate, Cheryl is forced to eat the meat, which is already completely spoiled. That's exactly what Quaid wanted, to destroy the last psychological barrier she still had. But the real nightmare comes afterward. At the end of the film, after Steven is killed during a confrontation, Quaid drags his body into the cell where Cheryl is being held and tosses in nothing more than a small pocket knife before locking the door. His final words make his plan clear.
Let's see how hungry you have to be to get through that.
Cheryl's fate is considered worse than death because the film never shows a way out. She remains alive, trapped beside a corpse, completely traumatized, with the horrifying implication that sooner or later she'll have to resort to cannibalism in order to survive. The Chosen One. In the Polish horror film Hellhole, we follow Marek, a young police officer who infiltrates an isolated monastery in Poland to investigate the disappearance of several women and the strange rituals carried out by the priests. At first, he believes he's uncovering a case of religious fanaticism, but he soon realizes that the monastery is hiding something far darker. The priests reveal that Marek is the central figure in an ancient prophecy. He wasn't brought to that place by chance. The entire plan was to prepare his body for a ritual that would allow a demonic force to be born on Earth. To complete the ceremony, they force Marek to take part in a series of rituals meant to transform him into the chosen one of the prophecy. But just when it seems like everything has gone wrong, the priests believe the ritual has failed, so they stab Marek and throw his body into the monastery's enormous underground pit. And that's when the real twist happens. During the night, the ritual finally works. Marek returns from the dead, but not as the man who entered that place. He is reborn as a demonic entity, taking on the very role the priests had spent years trying to create. When he returns to the monastery, his revenge is immediate. The priests who believed they controlled that power realize far too late that they never controlled anything at all. Marek uses his powers to destroy them, leaving their bodies arranged in the shape of inverted crosses. The ending makes one thing perfectly clear. Marek didn't escape hell, he became its gateway. As he looks toward a statue of Jesus and the sky begins to transform, the film suggests that the apocalypse has begun. The Living Field. In the Tall Grass begins with Becky and her brother Cal pulling over after hearing a young boy crying for help from the middle of a vast field of tall grass. The moment they step inside to rescue him, they realize that the place defies all logic. People can hear one another, but they can never find each other. The grass seems to shift constantly. Space itself becomes distorted, and time no longer follows a normal order. As more characters enter the field, it becomes clear that they're all trapped inside a massive cycle from which almost no one can escape. At the center of the field lies the mysterious Black Rock, an ancient formation responsible for controlling the entire place. Anyone who touches it gains a kind of absolute knowledge about how the field works, but at a terrible cost. Instead of gaining freedom, they completely lose their sanity and begin serving the field itself, doing everything they can to force new victims to touch the rock. That's exactly what happens to Ross, Tobin's father, who becomes the story's main antagonist.
And all flesh is grass.
The most terrifying part is that the field never needs to kill its victims right away. It traps everyone inside endless time loops, forcing them to relive the same nightmare over and over again. Many lose their minds, others die and return in another cycle, while both their bodies and their consciousness seem to be absorbed by the vegetation itself. The field functions like a living organism, feeding on the people who become trapped inside it. In the end, only one sacrifice is able to break the cycle for a single person, strongly implying that the trap remains there, waiting for its next victims. The perfect prison. In The Invasion, the true horror lies in the idea of completely losing control over your own body. The story begins after a space shuttle crashes on Earth, bringing with it an alien organism that rapidly spreads among humanity. The protagonist is Carol Bennell, a psychiatrist who begins noticing that the people around her are behaving with an unsettling sense of calm. Little by little, she discovers that the parasite invades the human body during deep sleep and takes complete control of its victim. The most disturbing detail is that, unlike previous versions of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, no one is replaced by a clone. The person remains alive, but trapped inside their own mind, unable to control their movements or even speak. It's like being forced to watch your own life unfold from inside your own body, without being able to do absolutely anything. As the infection spreads, the world enters what appears to be a perfect utopia. Wars come to an end, crime rates fall, people stop fighting. It seems like the perfect world, until you realize that all of it happens because no one has emotions, personality, or free will anymore. Everyone begins acting exactly the same. That's the concept that earns this movie a place among the most horrifying fates worse than death. The victims continue breathing, they continue seeing everything around them, but they no longer exist as individuals. Their consciousness remains imprisoned, while another force makes every decision for them.
You're not Ben.
I'm not just Ben. I'm more than Ben.
The Man Hiding in the Walls. The lost footage of Leah Sullivan follows film student Leah Sullivan as she sets out to make a documentary about the Mulcahy family massacre, a crime that took place decades earlier and was never fully explained. Alongside police officer Patrick Rook, she interviews local residents and visits the family's old house in search of answers. During the investigation, one name immediately stands out.
All right, and last is little Edward Mulcahy.
The family's son. Everyone believed he had died or disappeared on the night of the massacre, but small clues begin to suggest that this story may never have been true. According to the accounts, Edward had always been a troubled boy and grew up in an environment consumed by paranoia, mainly because of the constant fear of a nuclear attack.
Well, what wasn't he scared of? He was scared of everything. End of the world, nuclear war.
The house itself even had a massive underground bunker built for exactly that kind of emergency. The biggest revelation is that Edward never escaped that place. The severed arm found at the crime scene led the police to believe that he had also been one of the victims, but everything suggests that it was actually his way of faking his own death and disappearing without raising suspicion. When Leah decides to return to the house at night, she discovers the truth in the worst possible way. Edward never died. While he was still a child, he murdered his own parents and sister, cut off his own arm to make it look like he had been another victim, and spent decades living in the bunker, hidden beneath the house, completely isolated, driven insane, and reduced to an almost animalistic state. In the end, Leah and the police officer are attacked by Edward and disappear into the underground bunker, while Edward remains hidden, proving that the true person responsible for the massacre never left that place. The Prisoner. In Obsession, Bear is a young man who's completely in love with Nikki. After buying a magical wish-granting artifact called the One Wish Willow, he makes a wish.
I wish Nikki Freeman loved me more than anyone in the world.
The problem is that the wish doesn't make Nikki genuinely fall in love with him. Instead, a supernatural force takes control of her body, while her real consciousness remains trapped inside, unable to stop anything that's happening. For most of the film, she's forced to watch her own body act against her will, as though she were imprisoned inside her own mind. In one of the film's most heartbreaking moments, Nikki manages to regain control for just a few seconds, and begs Bear to kill her.
Just kill me.
Showing that she'd rather die than continue living that way. When Bear finally dies and the curse is broken, Nikki wakes up in the middle of the chaos. She realizes that her body was used to murder her closest friends, and understands that she'll have to live with that memory forever. The worst part is that no one would ever believe the truth. To the police, all the evidence points directly to her, and a story about a magical wish-granting artifact would only make it seem like she'd completely lost her mind. Nikki will most likely end up sentenced to life in prison, or committed to a psychiatric hospital. She survived, but she lost all of her friends, the freedom she wanted so badly, and any chance of building a new life. And this movie is filled with hidden details that almost nobody noticed. Easter eggs, symbolism, and even the entire story hidden inside the opening credits. If you'd like to learn even more about it, just click the video on your screen and watch our breakdown of every hidden detail in Obsession. I'll see you there.